But I go, can I just try another one? That moment comes and I just go, this is Sparta!
Gerard Butler once said that on the set of 300, somebody ended up in the hospital almost every single day. Not once. Not on a bad week. Every day. A spear that missed its mark by inches. A stunt that ended in a broken ankle. A production so punishing that nearly 2 decades later, Butler is still talking about it like it happened yesterday. This is the story fans never saw when they watched 300 Spartans stand their ground against an empire. The real battle that happened behind the cameras, and it might be more brutal than anything that made it to the screen. When 300 hit theaters in March of 2007, nobody in Hollywood expected what happened next. Zack Snyder was still a relatively unproven name behind the camera, working from Frank Miller's stylized graphic novel rather than a traditional script, and the studio had committed a production budget of roughly $65 million to a film that leaned entirely on visual spectacle instead of star power. It was a gamble, and then the film opened, and audiences didn't just show up, they flooded in. The movie pulled in a massive opening weekend and went on to gross several $100 million worldwide, a jaw-dropping return that turned a stylized, hyper-violent retelling of the Battle of Thermopylae into one of the defining hits of the year. It wasn't just a box office story either. The film's slow-motion combat, its blood-red color grading, and its sculpted, half-naked warriors turned into a genuine cultural moment, spawning countless parodies, an entire subgenre of fitness routines built around the cast physiques, and a line, "This is Sparta," that escaped the movie entirely and became a piece of internet vocabulary all its own. But none of that success tells you what it actually took to make the film. Behind the roaring battle cries and the flawless-looking choreography was a set that, according to Butler himself, resembled a war zone more than a soundstage. In interviews he's given over the years, and again more recently, Butler has described a daily reality on set where injuries weren't the exception. They were the rhythm of the shoot. He's recalled turning around mid-fight to see a castmate down after a spear came dangerously close to his eye. He's recalled another performer going down hard after a fall, walking away with a broken ankle. These weren't isolated accidents buried in a single bad week of filming. Butler has described them as a near-constant occurrence, something that became almost expected given how physically demanding the production was. Part of the reason injuries happened so often traces back to how Snyder chose to shoot the action. Rather than leaning heavily on stunt doubles, the way most large-scale action films do, many of the actors were pushed to perform their own fight sequences. The choice paid off visually. The combat in 300 feels immediate and personal in a way that heavily doubled action rarely does, but it came with real physical risk. The weapons used on set were dulled for safety, but that didn't eliminate danger entirely, not when actors were repeating high-impact stunts take after take, wearing heavy armor, moving through tight blue-screen spaces where there was little margin for error. Bruises, torn muscles, and cuts became part of the daily routine rather than rare setbacks. And by Butler's own account, there was rarely a day that passed without someone needing medical attention. The physical toll didn't start when cameras rolled, either. Long before filming began, Butler and much of the cast entered a brutal 7-month training period at Jim Jones, working under a trainer named Mark Twight who built a program combining high-intensity conditioning, heavy strength work, and simulated combat drills. Sessions reportedly stretched up to 6 hours a day, blending CrossFit-style circuits with martial arts and weapons, training designed to turn a group of actors into believable Spartan warriors. It wasn't training for the sake of aesthetics. Twight's approach was built around functional strength, the kind that would let the actors move convincingly under the weight of armor and through extended fight choreography, not just look impressive standing still. That training came at a steep physical cost, and Butler has never shied away from admitting it. He's spoken about the toll it took on his body, describing tendon problems, hip damage, and a shoulder injury severe enough that there were stretches when he could barely lift his arms. He said in blunt terms that the process was essentially wearing his body down even as it built him up for the role. And the demands didn't ease once filming started. Long days on set were often followed by more training, either to maintain the physique the film needed or to prepare for the next punishing action sequence. It became, in his words, a cycle that never really let up. one that didn't end when production wrapped either. Butler has said he was too physically drained to resume regular training for well over a year after the film finished shooting. What's striking, though, is how much of Butler's commitment to the role went beyond the physical. He's talked about a mental and almost spiritual process he used to get into character, describing meditative sessions where he tried, in his words, to feel Leonidas moving into him through some kind of imagined channel across time. It's an unusual thing for an actor to admit to on the record, but it speaks to how far Butler pushed himself to inhabit the role rather than simply perform it. He wasn't just trying to look like a Spartan king. He was trying to feel like one, carrying that mindset with him through months of grueling preparation and into every take on set. That full-body commitment extended to his willingness to do his own stunts, even when it meant absorbing real physical risk for the sake of authenticity. He's described the experience of throwing himself into some of the film's key battle sequences as one of the most intense adrenaline rushes of his career, a level of investment that clearly shows on screen even now. And it wasn't isolated to 300 either. In the years that followed, Butler found himself in several genuinely dangerous situations across other productions, including a bout of hypothermia while filming on location, and a frightening incident during an explosive stunt sequence in a different movie. Taken together, it paints a picture of an actor who has consistently thrown himself into physically demanding work throughout his career, not just for one iconic role, but as something closer to a pattern. Adding to the difficulty of the shoot was the way the film was actually put together. 300 wasn't filmed on elaborate historical sets or shot on location. Almost the entire production took place inside a studio, with the vast majority of what audiences eventually saw on screen built digitally afterward. That meant actors spent long stretches of the shoot surrounded by blue screens with minimal physical scenery, forced to imagine the battles, the landscapes, and even the blood and gore that would later be layered in during post-production. It's a demanding way to act, reacting convincingly to threats and chaos that simply aren't there in the room. And it required a level of concentration that isn't always visible to audiences who only see the finished, effects-heavy version of the film. The blue screen environment brought its own physical discomfort too. The intense lighting setups needed to achieve the film's distinct visual look generated significant heat inside the studio, turning the set into an uncomfortably hot environment for actors already wearing heavy armor and pushing through demanding physical choreography. Butler has said the heat and exhaustion became so severe at points that he passed out on set, a combination of dehydration and sheer physical overexertion catching up with him in the middle of production. It's a detail that rarely comes up when people talk about the film's iconic visuals, but it underscores just how taxing the shoot really was, even beyond the injuries and the training. Somewhere in the middle of all that strain, though, something else was quietly forming among the cast. A genuine sense of camaraderie that Butler has credited as essential to the film working at all. The ensemble, which included Lena Headey, David Wenham, Dominic West, and a then-rising Michael Fassbender, wasn't just a group of actors hitting marks together. They trained side by side for months, pushed through the same brutal conditioning sessions, and leaned on each other through the exhaustion and repeated takes that came with shooting almost entirely against blue screens. Butler has spoken about how that shared suffering built a kind of trust among the group that ended up translating directly onto screen, giving the depiction of Spartan loyalty and brotherhood a weight that felt earned rather than performed. It wasn't just choreography selling the idea of men who would die for one another. It was a cast that had genuinely been through something difficult together, and it showed. Looking back now, it's clear 300 left a mark far beyond its opening weekend numbers. Its visual style, defined by high-contrast color grading and stylized slow motion, influenced a wave of later films and television projects that borrowed heavily from its aesthetic. The training regimen built for the cast eventually became public and was adapted by gyms and fitness enthusiasts around the world, feeding into a broader cultural conversation about physique and masculinity that stretched well past the movie itself. And for Gerard Butler personally, the film changed everything. Before 300, he was a working actor with a handful of notable roles, but no defining breakout. After it, He became one of the more recognizable leading men in Hollywood, moving between action films, romantic comedies, and darker dramatic roles over the years that followed, always carrying with him the reputation the role of Leonidas had built. What makes Butler's recent comments so compelling isn't just the injuries or the grueling training schedule on their own. It's a fact that he's still talking about it this candidly, all these years later, with the kind of detail that suggests the experience genuinely marked him. The image most fans have of 300 is one of controlled, stylish violence. Perfectly timed slow motion, sculpted bodies, a script full of quotable one-liners. What Butler has described is something raw, real pain, real exhaustion, and a physical toll that lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. The Spartans on screen looked unbreakable. Off-screen, the people playing them were anything but, and maybe that's exactly why the performance still resonates the way it does. So the next time that famous roar echoes across the screen, it might be worth remembering what actually went into it. The injuries piling up week after week, the months of punishing training that nearly broke Butler's body before filming even started, the heat exhaustion, and the strange, almost spiritual lengths one actor went to just to feel like he belonged in that armor. It's a very different story from the one told on screen, but in a lot of ways, it's the more remarkable one. What do you think? Does knowing what really happened behind the scenes change the way you see 300? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, stick around for more stories the cameras never showed you.